The Industrial Revolution began in the United States in the early 1800s. By this time, most Americans were still working in agriculture, and only a small percent of the population was working in industry. After the Civil War, which began in the year 1861, millions of Americans left their farms to work in factories and mines. Already by the late 1800s, America had become the world's leading industrial nation. One of the reasons for the nation's industrial success was natural resources. The United States had a great amount of raw materials, including, but not limited to, timber, coal, iron, and copper. What was great about these resources was that Americans didn't need to import these materials from outside countries, but instead, they got them cheaply from their own grounds. Settlement in this region helped improve industry as well as the transcontinental railroad. People also began using a new resource known as petroleum. Petroleum was in use way before automotive years. Believe it or not, it isn't only used for cars. The American oil industry started when Edwin Drake drilled the first oil well near Titusville, Pennsylvania in the year 1859. The natural resources found in the nation helped it to industrialize rapidly. This caused the population to grow, with larger families and immigrants because of the better living conditions. This allowed more children to survive up until adulthood. Some new inventions that came out of the Industrial Revolution were the telephone and electricity. Alexander Graham Bell was a Scottish immigrant who created the telephone in the year 1876. Thomas Edison, as many of you should know, was the leading pioneer in technology. Edison had patents for many inventions, including the very useful light bulb. Another reason why the United States was able to industrialize rapidly was because of something called a free enterprise system. Many Americans believed in the idea of laissez-faire, a French phrase for let the people do as they choose. People who believed in this believed that the government should not interfere with the economy, other than to protect private property rights.
The Urbanization of America. The urbanization of America is mainly seen through the dramatic change in appearance of our cities. Buildings began to get taller and more elegant. Companies began to take pride in their buildings. Skyscrapers were a big part of urbanization, and they began to show up a lot more in the city skylines. But along with the cool new skyscrapers and all the fun stuff that began to happen with urbanization, a lot of problems began to arise also.
So, that's not cool.
Crime rates in cities started to go up a lot within the new urbanization and all the people moving in. Also came the new classification and the new separation into 3 classes: high society, middle class, and the working class. Number 1 was the high society class, and they were the richest people of all. They were the richest people in America. They had the highest level of wealth, the highest level of social standings. They were well established, and they lived in the most fashionable districts. They had all the best clothes. They had the butlers. Just very rich. Number 2 was middle class, and middle class mainly consisted of people who worked in industrial factories, who had stable jobs. Middle class were people who weren't exactly poor, but they weren't exactly wealthy. Middle class workers owned homes, and they were able to get by. They just never had enough to splurge, but they never didn't have enough to get by. They were just really in the middle. The 3rd class was the working class. The working class held the poorest of the poor. It consisted of people who both worked in the urban area and lived in the urban area. They got paid the least amount of money. They didn't have good living conditions or working conditions. Most people in working class lived in tenements, which were tiny apartments that housed many people. They were crowded, they were smelly, they weren't clean, they weren't safe to live in. Tenements just all around were not a good thing. People in the working class usually save their money in hopes to one day own a home, but most of them were not able to achieve that goal. Working class people just were the poorest of all the people. So that's not good.
Social Darwinism, a concept made by the British philosopher Herbert Spencer, who applied Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection to human society. In this process, those species who cannot adapt to the environment will gradually die, while those who do adapt thrive and lived on. Social Darwinism during the Gilded Ages meant that those who built businesses will continue to dominate and survive, while those who weren't as rich would live in poverty and they would die out. Another concept that was brought up during the Gilded Ages was the gospel of wealth. This concept was made by Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie said that the people with great fortune should use them by building schools and hospitals, other than giving handouts to the poor. Carnegie helped fund the creation of libraries in cities across the nation because libraries provided the information people needed to get ahead in life. Popular culture. Industrialization improved the standard of living for many people, enabling them to spend money on goods, entertainment, and recreations. Urban Americans divide their time into work and home. People began going out to public entertainment, such as the saloon. In cities, saloons often meant a place for social gatherings. Saloon played a major role in the lives of white male workers. Saloons often offered drinks, free toilet, water for horses, and free newspapers for new customers. They even offered the first free lunch. Another place was amusement park and sports. Working class families and single adults could find entertainment at a new amusement parks such as New York's Coney Island, amusements such as water slides and railroad rides, and carnivals only cost a nickel or a dime. Watching professional sports also became popular in the late 1800s. Baseball was one sport that was very popular to watch in the northern part of America. In 1891, James Naismith, athletic director for a college in Massachusetts, invented a new indoor game called basketball. Vaudeville and ragtime. A French theater, vaudeville, took on an American flavor in the early 1800s. With its hodgepodge of animal acts, acrobats, and dancers, the fast-paced show went on continuously all day and all night. Like vaudeville, ragtime music echoed the chaotic, hectic pace of city life. It consists of saloon pianists and banjo players using patterns of African American music. Politics in Washington. The two major parties were closely competitive in the late 1800s. However, the Republican Party had gained power in both the White House and the House of Congress in 1888. Using this power, the party passed legislation to address the points of national concern. In 1890, Representative William McKinley of Ohio pushed through the McKinley Tariff Bill that cut tobacco taxes and tariff rates on raw sugar, but greatly increased the rates on other goods, such as textiles, to discourage people from buying those imports. Also, tariff rates and big business regulations were hotly debated political issues. The Sherman Antitrust Act. Congress also responded to popular pressure to do something about the power of large business combinations known as trust. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prohibited any combination or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states. The law, however, was vaguely worded, poorly enforced, and weakened by judicial interpretation. Like the ICC, the Sherman Antitrust Act was more important for establishing a precedent than its immediate impact. Challenging Social Darwinism, Lester Frank Ward. In 1883, Lester Frank Ward published Dynamic Sociology, in which he argued that humans were different from animals because they had the ability to make plans to produce the future outcomes they desired. Ward's idea became known as Reform Darwinism. People, he insisted, had succeeded in the world because of their ability to cooperate. Competition was wasteful and time-consuming. Government, he argued, could regulate the economy, cure poverty, and promote education more efficiently than competition in the marketplace could. Writer Edward Bellamy published Looking Backwards in 1888, a novel about a man who falls asleep in 1887 and awakens in the year 2000 to find that the nation had become a perfect society with no crime, poverty, or politics. In this fictional society, the government owns all industry and shares the wealth equally with all Americans. Bellamy's ideas were essentially a form of socialism. His book became a bestseller and helped shape the thinking of some American reformers. Criticism of industrial society also appeared in literature in a new style of writing known as naturalism. Social Darwinists argued that people could make choices to improve their situation. Naturalists challenged this idea by suggesting that some people failed in life simply because they were caught up in circumstances they could not control.